So we jump into chapter 12 this week, and we are introduced to the well-known Abram, who later becomes Abraham. And actually, before chapter 12, in chapter 11, it lists the lineage leading up to Abram. And it's interesting there to note, before we get into chapter 12, that they list the brothers, or the sons of Terah, who is Abram's father, in this order where Abram is listed first, but Abram is not the oldest, which in this tradition would be very odd because they would always go in biological order. And so I really think that God inspired the writers of the Bible to do it this way. And he's done it on several different occasions. It's not only with Abram where he's listed, but it's always the one that is the most faithful to God that is listed first. And I think that's important, that God doesn't necessarily see where you're born or where you came from or what order you're in or some kind of importance that the world puts on things, but he puts us in order of how we follow him. And so already we see Abram's listed there most likely due to his obedience that we continue to find out in his journey with God. And so in chapter 12, we're introduced to Abram with this promise. God tells him to go. In verse 1, it says, "Now the Lord said to Abram, go for yourself away from your country, from your relatives. Let's note that in a moment. And your father's house to the land that I will show you." And it goes on to make promises that he will be blessed. Those that bless him will be blessed. Those that curse him will be cursed. And it's this great blessing that required first obedience. And so we see that Abram starts out this journey of obedience. But he starts out and he's kind of only half obedient. Now let me show you what I mean. In verse 5, it says, Abram took Sarai his wife, which would be proper, and Lot his brother's son. This is a disobedience to what God said, because he said, leave your family. Now, this is interesting because in the previous chapter, it said that Sarai, his wife, was barren. She could not have children. And the reason that the disobedience of taking Lot is a big deal is because they brought him most likely as their son. Abram's brother had died, and so he was taking care of Lot, his brother's son. But him taking him along was almost as if, I don't know if I'll ever have children, so I'm going to take you with me, even though God said he would promise him that in you all families of the world would come. And so it's a little bit of the start of this process we see where Abram trusts God, but not quite in this area. And how many of us have been there? We trust God, but maybe not in every area. And now we'll see later on, and we won't see it right now, but we'll see later on in their journey that there is a consequence to him disobeying and bringing Lot. Lot becomes a thorn in his flesh a little bit. But the thing I want to focus on as we continue is that, so God told Abram to go to the first place. He doesn't give him the whole picture. He doesn't tell him everything. He doesn't give him the whole idea of where he wants him to go, but Abram follows. And so in verse 7, this is the start of 4 major places we see that he says this just in the beginning. He does it throughout his life. But in verse 7, it says, the Lord appeared to Abram and said, I'll give you this land to your posterity. So Abram built an altar there to the Lord who had appeared to him. So his response was worship. So we see that God spoke, Abraham obeyed, God spoke again, Abram praised. And we see this pattern over and over again. Then in verse 8, it said again, he went on to the next place God told him. From there, he pulled up his tent and departed to the mountain on the east of Bethel and pitched his tent with Bethel on the west and Ai on the east. And there he built an altar to the Lord, and he called upon the name of the Lord. And so we won't get through all of chapter 12 today, but what I want to focus on here is that God doesn't always show us the whole picture. He doesn't give us the whole idea. He says, do this, obey this, and then we must do that. And that's what Abram did. So God gave him a commandment. He followed that. His first response was, I'll worship God. God spoke again. He obeyed. His first response, I'll worship God again. And so today I encourage you, that's what I want to take from this today is, are we taking the time to hear God so that we can obey? Are we obeying? And then are we praising God in the midst of wherever he may take us? It may not be the best place. Some of these places God has him stop aren't great places, but he has to be obedient. And so today I'm asking you, are you listening to God? Are you obeying God? And are you praising God in the midst? That's our story for today. We'll finish up chapter 12 next time.